There's something buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned church in Kentucky, something that was never meant to be uncovered, and the ones who spoke of it were 9-year-old girls who had never been there before. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you will undo something in your mind that can never be reassembled. In the winter of 1834, a preacher named Ezekiel Morrison and his twin daughters arrived in a remote Appalachian community called Pine Hollow, a settlement so isolated that cartographers left it blank, as if something told them to look away. And maybe they were right. Rebecca and Rachel Morrison were not ordinary children. They weren't psychic. They weren't possessed. They were something far more dangerous. Within 3 days of their arrival, they had revealed secrets no child should know. Names, dates, private sins whispered only in confession, and long-buried crimes that had vanished from memory. But the most disturbing part, every word they spoke turned out to be true. This isn't a ghost story. This is a story about knowledge, impossible knowledge, spoken from the mouths of children who hadn't lived long enough to learn what they knew. The type of knowledge that doesn't come from books or sermons or family legends, but from somewhere else, somewhere ancient, somewhere forbidden. The events that followed were recorded in the final journal of Pastor William Phillips. That journal sat sealed beneath rubble for over 150 years until it was discovered in 1987 beneath the rotted floor of the old Pine Hollow church. Its pages reeked of mildew and dust, but its words, his words, still dripped with fear. And now, for the first time, you're going to hear what was never supposed to be read. But I warn you, once we begin, there's no unknowing it. You will question memory, you will question history, you will question the limits of what the human mind is capable of and who or what has access to it. This isn't just about a pair of twins, it's about a system, a silence, a buried cathedral of secrets built brick by brick through time and guarded by those who fear what would happen if it ever came undone. You're not just watching a video, you're entering the room where the bodies are buried and the door is closing behind you. There's something unnerving about twins, the symmetry, the shared mind, the unspoken language that seems to pass between them without words. But the Morrison twins were beyond that. They didn't just finish each other's sentences, they finished other people's nightmares. The year was 1834. The Civil War was still decades away. Electricity was unheard of in the hills of Kentucky, but what Pine Hollow lacked in progress, it made up for in piety and secrets. The kind of secrets that rot beneath the surface like a buried infection, quiet but fatal. Ezekiel Morrison was a man hollowed out by suffering. He had lost his wife to childbirth in the dead of winter. Snowbound in a one-room cabin, he delivered his own daughters by the light of a dying fire. He said he heard a sound that night, not a cry, but something deeper, a tone, a signal. He never told anyone else about it, except Pastor Phillips. That night, over a dwindling fire, he confessed that since the day they were born, his daughters would sometimes speak in voices that didn't belong to them, sometimes in languages they never learned. At first, it was dismissed as trauma, grief, the delusions of a broken man raising 2 girls alone, but then the patterns emerged. The twins would speak names of people no one in their village had ever met, only to discover those exact names weeks later when traveling to distant towns. They drew pictures of places they'd never seen, only to recognize them years later, unchanged. They dreamt of strangers, and those strangers, more often than not, turned up dead. But it wasn't until they arrived at Pine Hollow that things turned violent, not with blood, but with revelation. Rebecca and Rachel didn't just know secrets. They unlocked them, like picking the locks of the soul, and once they did, those secrets didn't just come out, they dragged people with them. In a single day, a God-fearing, orderly community began to unravel. A respected doctor exposed as a fraud, a wealthy church donor revealed as a thief, marriages torn apart by truths no one was prepared to admit, and at the center of it all, two girls staring with eyes far older than their faces. How does a child know what's buried beneath a pastor's church floor? How do they name the color of a cloth that wrapped a bottle no one else has ever seen? These weren't coincidences, they weren't lucky guesses. This was intrusion, a crack in the order, a glitch in the veil. And whatever came through it was only getting started. By the second day, the entire congregation was gripped by a silent hysteria. No one dared speak of it openly, but everyone felt it. A pressure, a shift, as if the very walls of the church built by faithful hands and buried guilt had begun to whisper back. The twins had spoken truths no child could know, and the people of Pine Hollow were unraveling. But this isn't just their story. This is yours now. Because what happened in that church isn't some forgotten relic of frontier folklore. It's a pattern, one that repeats through history behind locked doors, sealed archives, and the polite lies of official record. You felt it, haven't you? That gnawing sense that something isn't right, that what you've been told doesn't match what you feel, that beneath every system, every institution, there's a core of rot, hidden by ritual and repetition. That's why you're here. And if you've made it this far, you're not just curious, you're searching for truth, for power, for the missing piece they never wanted you to find. So pause, right now, and do 3 things that mark you as one of us. Subscribe to the Elite Ledger. This isn't entertainment, this is weaponized truth. Like this video because it pushes it deeper into the algorithm that was built to bury it. And stay sharp, because what you're about to hear next could unmake the version of reality you were raised to obey. Now, back to Pine Hollow. That Sunday service, the one recorded in Pastor Phillips's journal, was supposed to be a quiet sermon about repentance, but what unfolded was closer to Judgment Day. One by one, the girls approached members of the church, not with accusations, but with knowledge. Rebecca called out a respected elder for stealing from the collection plate. Rachel exposed a hidden child locked in an attic. They named names, described secret affairs in detail, recited events that had never been and spoken aloud. And every person they confronted collapsed under the weight of truth. No threats, no theatrics, just facts, delivered by children who had no right to know them. This wasn't prophecy. This was a system of knowing that bypassed learning entirely. Something, or someone, was feeding them the forbidden, and Pine Hollow was just the beginning. By the 3rd day, silence had become the loudest voice in Pine Hollow. No hymns were sung, no meals were shared. People walked the paths of the village like ghosts, staring, whispering, avoiding the eyes of those whose secrets had been pulled into daylight. The twins were no longer seen as children. They were mirrors, and no one wanted to see their reflection. And yet, it wasn't fear of the girls themselves that chilled the bones of the congregation. It was the implications. If they could know that much, what else might they reveal? How many more sins lay buried, wrapped in holy silence and generations of denial? That's what this really is, isn't it? Not about ghosts or miracles, but about the institutions we trust to keep the truth from rising. Churches, governments, schools, courts, media. They don't exist to reveal, they exist to contain. And in 1834, 2 9-year-old girls broke containment. But ask yourself this: what if Pine Hollow was just one node in a larger network of places designed to keep secrets sealed? What if the Morrison twins weren't the anomaly, but the crack? Because from that point forward, the timeline warps. The journal shifts. Pastor Phillips, once a man of order, faith, and control, begins to write in short, frantic entries. His once precise cursive devolves into jagged strokes. His thoughts scatter. Time bends. He writes of sounds in the night, voices in his dreams that are not his own, visions that come when he kneels to pray. He sees children watching him from the corners of the room, even when the twins are gone. But the most chilling entry comes on the night of November 17th. The girls stood in the sanctuary after dark, no lanterns, no light. Yet I saw their eyes, shining. Rebecca whispered something in a language I cannot find in scripture. Rachel echoed it in reverse, and for a moment, just one moment, I saw the walls breathe, as if the church itself had exhaled a memory it could no longer hold. This is where theology fails, where language fractures, and where forbidden memory becomes visible. What did those girls awaken? What ancient frequency were they tuned to? Because if a place like Pine Hollow, so small, so forgotten, could hide that much rot, then what else has been buried in the places you were told were sacred? And more importantly, who put it there? The story of Pine Hollow didn't die with the Morrison twins' departure. It metastasized like a virus hidden in the blood of the village, quiet, undetected, but terminal. 3 weeks after the girls left, the church burned. Pastor Phillips's final journal entry was recovered from beneath a scorched floorboard. The ink had bled from heat and water, but one phrase was still legible. "We invited the wrong spirit in, and it knew our names." No official investigation followed, no arrests, just silence, the kind that governments and religious orders specialize in, because the real story isn't in what happened, it's in what didn't happen. No news reached the Lexington papers, no word left the mountains. It was as if Pine Hollow had swallowed its own history and buried the bones. Now ask yourself, how many other towns are like it? How many secrets have been scrubbed from history under the mask of rural isolation? How many lost journals, accidental fires, and tragic family disappearances were actually containment events? Because that's what this looks like. A breach. A collapse of the illusion. A moment when the system failed to silence the signal. And here's where it gets worse. There's evidence, fragments scattered across early 19th century documents, that the Morrison twins weren't the only ones. In a mining camp near Butte, Montana in 1836, 2 brothers were reported to have spoken fluently in dead native dialects with no prior exposure. In Vermont, 1841, an orphan named Eloise sang in Old Church Latin while sleepwalking, verses that hadn't been used since the Inquisition. These weren't flukes. They were symptoms of something ancient leaking through the seams. And the church wasn't the only institution trying to contain it. Buried inside military archives, sealed under obscure federal case numbers, are declassified memos referring to phenomenon A13, a shorthand for spontaneous anomalous cognition in minors. The files were redacted, but one sentence remained. Subjects exhibit awareness of classified information with no recorded access point. Potential breach in temporal firewall. Temporal firewall. This isn't spiritual, it's structural. We're dealing with architecture of the mind, of time, of history itself, and some children were born without the walls. So the question is no longer what the twins were, it's who built the prison around us, and why did they fail to contain them? We begin to touch the true depth of the abyss. Ask yourself, if a child can know what no one has taught them, what no one has spoken aloud, what no living soul has ever shared, then where is that information coming from? The past, or something older than time? This is the turning point in all forbidden histories, not when we ask what happened, but when we begin to ask why we were kept from knowing it. What you must understand is this: the Morrison twins did not perform parlor tricks. They did not guess. They accessed information, memory, trauma, sin, but not only in Pine Hollow. They tapped into a field, a kind of collective record that bleeds from people, buildings, land, and legacy, something older than books, older than written language, maybe older than human thought itself. You've heard whispers of it before, the Akashic record, the oversoul, the memory of the earth. But most modern men have forgotten, or been trained to forget, because if the average man could access truth without permission, without pastors, without politicians, without professors or credentials or dogma, then the entire hierarchy collapses. Power depends on your blindness, and the twins were sighted. Now, imagine for a moment that this isn't rare, that it's natural, that children are born with access. and that institutions exist not to raise them, but to shut them down. Have you ever wondered why the first thing we do with a child who sees too much is medicate them? Why we punish the ones who ask why and reward the ones who comply? Why some kids draw disturbing things and we rush to say they must have seen it on TV rather than admit they might remember? Something else? The twins were a system failure. They passed through childhood without being neutralized, and for 72 hours in Pine Hollow they turned a church into a confessional, and a confessional into a crime scene. But here's the part no one wants to hear. They weren't the only ones. In fact, they might have been the tip of the spear. Because in the sealed notes of Pastor Phillips, there's a line written in the margin beside the final entry. They said we were the sixth, and that the seventh would be the last. Sixth what? Sixth awakening? Sixth sight breach? And if they were the sixth, who and where is the seventh? The seventh. That single word, left scrawled in the margins of a dying man's journal, carries the weight of something far larger than Pine Hollow. It implies sequence, pattern, design, and the moment you accept that, you must confront an even more disturbing question. If these awakenings follow a structure, then who built it? Because structures don't form by accident. There is a hand behind the veil. Always has been. The twins didn't just disrupt a village, they cracked a seam in the dam, a dam built to keep memory, power, and awareness locked behind layers of narrative. Religious doctrine, national history, institutional trust, all of it. Just camouflage. The Morrison case wasn't covered up because of the supernatural. It was covered up because it exposed the machinery, the hidden gears grinding beneath reality that were never meant to be seen. You see, control doesn't require chains. It requires amnesia. You were taught to forget, to mock the ancient, to laugh at anything unexplained. That was never an accident. It was protocol. But the twins, they remembered. Not just events, but intentions. They described structures that predated the church they slept in, walls that existed before Pine Hollow was a whisper on any map. According to Pastor Phillips's damaged notes, Rachel once said something in her sleep that he copied word for word. The stones remember, and they weep when you kneel. It haunted him. He wrote it again and again, underlining it until the ink carved into the page. But it didn't end there. 3 days before the fire, Rebecca entered the sanctuary alone and stood beneath the pulpit. According to the journal, she whispered something to the air, and the floor beneath her cracked, as if responding. She said the names of 4 men buried beneath the building, none of them listed in any grave record, none of them known by the town. But in the ground was excavated during a failed reconstruction attempt in the 1920s. 4 human skulls were found beneath the sanctuary. One had a rusted iron nail driven through the temple. Another had its jaw shattered inward. These were not natural burials. These were sacrifices. What was the church built to hide? Or worse, what was it feeding? You're not going to like the answer, because the deeper we go, the more it begins to look like this wasn't an accident. It was an altar. An altar. Not the kind bathed in candlelight and hymns, but the old kind. The kind that predates religion. The kind that drinks blood and binds memory in stone. The kind that demands silence and rewards obedience with forgetfulness. That's what Pine Hollow was. That's what the church stood on. Not holy ground, but sealed ground. And the Morrison twins, they broke the seal. Let that settle in your bones for a moment. This wasn't about psychic children. This wasn't a haunting. This was a sight breach, a failure in an ancient containment system that most of humanity doesn't even know exists. But those in power do, and they've always known. Look closely through suppressed archaeological reports, and you'll find strange overlaps. Churches built over mounds, government buildings over cave networks, schools and hospitals constructed on top of abandoned mining shafts. Always something buried, always something sealed, and always a new institution, moral, medical, religious, to watch over it, like candles lit in the dark, to distract from the thing moving behind the walls. Now ask yourself, what are they protecting us from? Or maybe more accurately, what are they protecting from us? There are whispers, hidden in Freemason records, Jesuit letters, and secret court transcripts of what they call the remnant. A sliver of memory that survives the resets, something older than humanity, encoded into land, bloodlines, and, occasionally, children. Children like Rebecca and Rachel. In one obscure letter, dated 1835 and buried in a private collection of a Yale secret society, an anonymous writer references the Eastern Kentucky breach, describing it as the closest we've come to a total collapse of the veil since the 1799 Sussex event. That letter wasn't signed, but the wax seal bore the same emblem carved into the altar at Pine Hollow, an Ouroboros wrapped around a single, open eye. You've seen it before. It's on currency, architecture, intelligence agency logos, hidden in plain sight, not as a warning but as a signature, and once you recognize it, you see it everywhere. The twins were never the anomaly, they were the consequence. The question isn't how they knew what they knew. The question is, who designed the world to make sure you never would? Not pretending this was ever about ghosts. This is about systems of control so old, so complete, that they no longer require chains, because they trained you to wear obedience like skin. The Morrison twins didn't just expose personal sins, they cracked the shell of the great lie, that you were born to be small, born to obey, born to forget. When Rebecca stepped into that church, she wasn't casting judgment. She was triggering collapse. A collapse of narrative, of illusion, of the tidy little story the world told Pine Hollow and tells you. That life is linear, that truth is written, that the past is fixed. But the truth is far more dangerous. Reality is not a wall, it's a veil. And some children are born with knives in their minds. Pastor Phillips knew this, but he didn't have the language, only fear. In one of his more frenzied entries, he describes waking to find the twins standing at the foot of his bed. He claims they were not speaking, but vibrating, humming, at a pitch barely audible, but enough to crack the glass of the oil lamp beside him. He says they spoke in unison. The place remembers, you do not. Let that echo in your chest for a second. The place remembers, you do not. What does that mean? It means you have forgotten, not just stories, not just names, but a primal memory of what was taken from you, of what the world was before the veils were sewn shut. Pine Hollow was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to be swallowed. Every page of the pastor's journal should have been lost in the fire, but it wasn't. A single copy survived, passed from hand to hand, protected by men who knew what it was, a fracture in the system, a map of how memory bleeds through. And now that you're hearing it, the system will register that fracture again. So here's what I want you to do. Right now, pause and type the phrase, "The place remembers." Then type it again. That's not just for the algorithm, that's to mark your moment, a signal to the system that you're awake now, because once you hear this level of truth, there is no going back to sleep. And the twins were only the beginning. Now you feel it, that cold shift behind the eyes, the sensation that something is moving, not out in the world, but inside you. That's not fear, that's the boundary dissolving. You've been taught that truth is found in books, degrees, experts. But what if truth is remembered, not learned? What if the deepest knowledge about the self, the world, and the forces shaping it was never something you needed to discover, but something that was stolen from you before you could speak? Let's go back to Pine Hollow, briefly. The journal states that on the final morning of their visit, Rebecca stared out at the congregation and said something few understood at the time. She whispered, "They come where guilt is thickest." And then she added, "That's why they always build over it." Who are they? Not spirits, not demons, not aliens. Something older, something that feeds not on bodies but on memory, on suppression, on silence, on shame. Structures aren't just built to house us, they're built to hold us in place. That church was placed exactly where the Whitman twins were murdered, not for coincidence, but for continuity. The pain, the secrets, the ritual, it imprinted the land. The altar wasn't sanctified, it was weaponized. And Pine Hollow wasn't the only site like this. Across the continent, there's a dark grid. Old missions, isolated schools, forgotten asylums, built atop similar events, covered in holy symbols, filled with smiling authorities, but underneath, rot. The kind of rot that binds souls to structures. Why? Because when you bury trauma in a place and then fill that place with belief, obedience, and ritual, you trap consciousness there, you pin the human spirit under layers of guilt and hierarchy. And what feeds on that? Whatever stood behind the veil before you arrived. You were born into a game already in progress. The twins simply saw the board, and now maybe, so do you. But if you think this ends in Kentucky, you're not listening closely enough. Because when the girls left Pine Hollow, they didn't vanish. They were taken, not by their father, not by the townspeople, by men who arrived wearing black coats, and no insignia. They spoke no names, showed no papers, but they knew exactly who the girls were. And they knew something else too, that what the girls could access, if left uncontained, could crack open the entire system. In Black didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They came at dawn, arriving in a coach with no markings, pulled by horses that left no prints in the frost. 3 men, tall, expressionless, eyes like polished coal, no greetings, no prayers, just one sentence. The girls come with us now. Pastor Phillips tried to protest, tried to demand credentials, but he never finished the sentence. The man nearest to him raised a single hand, and Phillips forgot what he was about to say, forgot why he'd stood, forgot what day it was. It's in the journal, written with a shaking hand. I stood there, and for a moment I believed I had no daughters, no church, no name. Only silence. It passed, but something in me did not return. That's not hypnosis. That's intervention. You see, there's a level of authority that never files paperwork, that doesn't wear a badge, that doesn't vote or get elected. They don't exist in our world, because our world exists inside theirs. And when someone threatens the latticework of amnesia that holds this system together, those men appear. They're not government. They own governments. You think this is conspiracy? That word was invented to keep you from saying truth hidden with intent. Because what happened in Pine Hollow was never supposed to leave the mountain. The girls weren't killed. They were studied. Taken into a facility referenced only once, in a single declassified 1870 letter marked G17 Protocol, Subjective Memory Disruption, Eastern Cell. The location? Classified. But the final line said, the children are stable, though replication has failed. They remain attuned to non-linear memory fields, recommendations, deep sedation, isolation, observation until degradation. Degradation. That's how these entities speak about children. Children who remembered things they shouldn't have been able to remember. Children who saw through time and pointed out what their elders had buried. Do you see it now? This world you live in, your education, your media, your rituals, it's not built to inform you. It's built to dull you, to wrap your mind in cotton and keep your soul from noticing the bars. The twins didn't escape the system, but their story did, and now you're hearing it. So ask yourself, what are you remembering that they want you to forget? There's something you need to understand before we go further. You were never meant to hear this story. Not from a book, not from a screen, not from another man. Because the truth, the real kind, doesn't travel through official channels. It rides the fringe, it hides in whispers, it burns in the minds of the sleepless and the damned. The Morrison twins were silenced, but silence doesn't mean stillness. In certain obscure archives, ones not digitized, ones not indexed, you'll find cross-referenced sightings over the next 14 years. 2 girls, always 9 years old, identical, unaged, reported in places that don't exist on maps anymore. An abandoned mission in northern Arizona, a burned-out boarding school in New Hampshire, an island sanitarium off the coast of Washington, now underwater. Witnesses say they never spoke, but when people left the room, they returned changed. Men wept without knowing why. Women confessed to crimes they hadn't committed, but had considered. In one case, an entire psychiatric staff resigned after 3 nights, citing environmental dread. There were no bodies, no files, just rumors. And one warning: if they appear, do not answer them. But ask yourself, why? Why would institutions so devoted to treatment, to faith, to order, fear the voice of a child? Because their words disintegrate the facade. Because some voices don't just speak, they unravel. The Morrison twins were memory bearers, vessels, not psychic, resonant. They didn't reach into the future. They reached beneath the architecture of the lie. And once you know that's possible, once you feel that kind of memory stir inside you, it becomes harder to return to your scripted life. The 9 to 5, the small talk, the silent compliance. Because something inside you starts to itch. A phantom limb of knowledge. A sense that somewhere long ago you knew more, and someone to okay it from you. That's not a feeling, that's an alarm. Because the same force that silenced the twins is still at work. It lives in the curriculum you never questioned. In the sermons that spoke of sin but never of systems. In the therapists who drug the symptom and ignore the source. You've been taught to mistrust intuition, to label it irrational, emotional, dangerous. But the twins, they trusted it fully. And that's what made them a threat, because a man connected to his memory is dangerous. But a child connected to the world's memory, that's revolution. Hears the call at least once, usually in silence, usually in the dark, when the noise of the world finally shuts up and something deeper speaks. You've heard it too. It doesn't use words, it uses weight. A pressure in the skull, a cold behind the eyes, a sense, brief but unforgettable, that something is watching you from behind the veil. That is not paranoia, that is recognition. And the Morrison twins, they lived in that state. They didn't visit the veil, they came from behind it. Let me explain. In the classified account of Dr. Marius Delange, an early neurologist contracted to observe anomalous children for a now-defunct agency known as Section Null, there is a report marked simply, Case RR9. He describes observing 2 identical girls who claim to remember being born beneath a stone ceiling, who said that before they were human, they were called, not by a mother, but by a sound, not of this earth. The doctor chalked it up to trauma-induced delusion, until the girls, in perfect synchronization, described the contents of a locked safe in his office, down to the fold marks in a photo of his deceased sister. He resigned a week later. The report ends with a line written in red ink. They are not individuals, they are a memory split in 2. That's what the institutions couldn't allow to spread. Not magic, not miracles. Reintegration. Because if you start remembering who you really are, what you came here knowing, then their world unravels, their structures, their authorities, their rules, because those systems weren't made for you, they were made to contain you. So they had to fracture you, splinter your knowing, scatter your power into childhood shame, adolescent distraction, and adult exhaustion. But cracks remain. Pine Hollow was one of them. And if you're still watching this, then you are one too. You were never meant to be whole. You were meant to be manageable. And the fact that you're still here Listening, absorbing, remembering means something inside you is no longer compliant. You are breaking pattern. And once a man breaks pattern, he becomes unpredictable, uncontainable, unusable. Now listen carefully. If they erased the Morrison twins from history, what else did they erase? And more importantly, what else did you once know before they taught you to forget? No one dares ask out loud. What happens to a world built on lies when enough men stop believing in them? Not protesting, not voting, not screaming into digital voids, but quietly withdrawing belief. That's what they fear. Not rebellion, not fire, but disengagement from the script. The Morrison twins didn't protest the church, they didn't scream, they simply spoke what they saw. And the effect was catastrophic. Because truth, spoken in innocence, has a nuclear weight inside a corrupted system. Let me tell you what happened on the final night before they vanished. Pastor Phillips didn't record the full account. His last journal entry is jagged, rushed, as if written by a man whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. But here's what we know. At 3:11 a.m., townspeople reported hearing a sound like stone grinding against stone. No earthquakes, no wind, just deep vibration. Then the bell of the church, untouched, rang once, just once, and stopped. When Phillips entered the sanctuary, he found Rachel standing barefoot in the center of the room, her hands covered in soil. She said one sentence, "The roots have begun to remember." He asked what that meant. She looked at him, eyes vacant, glowing faintly in the candlelight, and said, "They buried memory to grow their empire, but the soil does not forget." That's when he heard movement, beneath the floorboards. He ran, and by morning the girls were gone. No signs of struggle, no tracks, just the faint scent of lilac and ash. The townspeople never spoke of it again. A collective silence fell. Some say it was fear, others say it was something else, a pressure in the mind that told them, forget or suffer. Years later, those who broke the silence, who tried to write letters, tell their children, record their memories, died strangely. Brain aneurysms, sudden cardiac arrest, disappearances, or madness. But you've heard all this now, you've crossed the threshold, and that makes you something they can't control so easily. Because when one man knows the truth, they can silence him, but when thousands remember, the veil begins to tear. So if you're still with me, prepare yourself, because what comes next isn't a story, it's a trigger. Just erase the twins. They erased the pattern. Because what Pine Hollow proved, what those two little girls embodied, was that human consciousness isn't confined to one body, one life, one timeline. It echoes, it transmits, it returns. And the system that governs your world, it requires you to forget that. That's why history is not taught, it's scripted. You think you know the past? Name me 3 events from before the 1800s you felt in your bones. You can't, because they turned history into trivia, into multiple choice, into dust. But the memory is still there, not in your head, in your blood, in your spine. The same way the Morrison twins accessed it, the place remembers, and so do you. Because what happened in Kentucky was not an isolated incident. It was one leak in a vast network of containment zones, and the twins were an echo of something ancient, a force older than any nation, older than scripture, a memory that once lived in all of us. But they sealed it, buried it beneath doctrine, ritual, calendar, culture. They taught you how to count time so you'd forget what came before it. They created childhood to sever your access to pre-birth knowing. They created adulthood to shackle you with labor and shame. They created education to overwrite the soul's memory with obedience to state and industry. But every now and then, someone breaks through, someone remembers, not facts, not data, but function, a knowledge of how the world really works beneath the illusion. The Morrison girls could see trauma crystallized in structures. They could smell guilt the way wolves smell blood. They could step into a place and hear what it was hiding, not magic. reconnection. And if that sounds impossible to you, ask yourself this. Why would they spend billions to medicate, distract, and addict you if your natural state was truly powerless? They know what you are. They know what you could become. They just need you to forget it long enough to die tame. But if you're still here, watching, breathing heavier now, you haven't forgotten. You're just starting to remember. And what you do next will decide everything. Right before a man awakens, when the system panics, you can't see it, but it feels it. That tightening in your chest, that sudden doubt, that irrational urge to close this video and move on with your day. That's not boredom. That's the program fighting back. Because once you remember who you are, fully, you become unpredictable, unstable, unusable. The Morrison twins were unusable. You know what that means? They couldn't be bought, broken, or bent. And in this world, that's the one thing that gets you erased. Their existence proved something lethal to the architects of this lie, that the veil isn't permanent, that memory is not linear, and that human beings are not born blank. You're not a clean slate. You're a sealed vault. And every dream, every moment of déjà vu, every flash of insight you've ignored, it was a knock on the door. You think Rachel and Rebecca were rare? No, they were early. Every few generations, the veil thins, the machinery rusts, the memories come leaking through. But what happens next determines everything. Because when a man remembers the trauma of his ancestors as if it were his own, he stops participating in the systems that fed on their pain. And when enough men do that, the machine starts to grind. That's what they fear. Not your politics, not your guns, not your opinions. They fear your withdrawal, because you're the battery. You're the currency. Your silence, your labor, your agreement, those are the chains. And the Morrison twins? They were a signal flare. They showed what happens when even two small minds refuse the script, and now that signal has reached you. You didn't choose this video by accident. You were called. And the moment you felt that chill in your spine, that recognition in your gut, that was your confirmation. You are not like the others. You never were. You've just been playing small in someone else's game. And it ends the moment you say, no more. Real prison. Not the walls, not the laws, not the debts or the jobs or the screens. The real prison is identity, and they built yours for you before you ever had a chance. You were given a name you didn't choose, a nation you didn't select, a religion you were told never to question. You were handed a story about what life is, what truth is, what death is, and you were told, this is who you are. But it was a lie. Not because your parents were evil, not because teachers were cruel, but because they too were prisoners. And when a man is born inside a cell, he stops seeing the bars. The Morrison twins never accepted the story, because they remembered what came before it. That's why they had to be taken. Because a person who remembers his own soul, uncorrupted, unprocessed, unashamed, cannot be ruled. He can be killed, but he cannot be owned. And you are waking up to that same memory, the same knowing that made them dangerous, the same fire that lives in every man who's ever looked at the world and said, this is not what it was meant to be. You feel it now, don't you? The friction in your bones, the echo in your chest, the rage that has no clear target, but grows with every lie you're told to swallow. That's the ancient self, the one they buried beneath taxes and traffic and football games and pharmaceuticals. But here's the truth they never wanted you to realize. That ancient self never died. It's watching, waiting. For the moment you remember. That's what this video is. Not entertainment. Not education. A signal. And if you've made it this far, then you're one of us. So lock it in, right now. Scroll down and comment. I remember. Do it twice. Once for who you were before the world told you who to be, and once for who you'll become when the veil is gone. I remember. I remember. This is your transformation. This is your descent. This is the beginning of everything they fear. You've noticed it. The pull, the pressure, the sense that something ancient is stirring inside you. That's not imagination. That's not suggestion. That's activation. Because once the lie is broken, it doesn't repair. It bleeds. And the cracks you've made in the wall, they're starting to spread. Let's go deeper. After the twins vanished, Pine Hollow fell into what locals would call a hollow sleep. No one remembers what happened in the weeks that followed. It's like time skipped. Journal entries stopped. Letters home were never sent. Babies born in that month had no birth records. It's as if the town was frozen and then reset. And when the world resumed, it was quieter, smaller, dimmer. That's what psychological control systems do when they're damaged. They don't just silence the witnesses. They dampen the field around your town, your home, your very mind. You've felt it before, haven't you? That sudden fog, that eerie stillness when you try to push beyond what you're supposed to think about. It's not anxiety, it's a firewall, installed in your nervous system, in your generational trauma, in your DNA. And the Morrison twins, they walked straight through it. That's why their memories scared the system so deeply, not just because they saw what happened, but because their clarity was contagious. One man hears the truth, he doubts, but 100, 1,000, the veil shreds. That's why you're still being lied to. Because you're part of the firewall now, or you're part of the breach. There's no in-between, so make your decision. Keep sleepwalking, or wake others up. Share this message. Speak the forbidden. Disobey the narrative that wants you sedated, neutered, compliant. Because a single man remembering is a risk. But an entire brotherhood awakening, that's the end of control. This is no longer about the Morrison twins. This is about you. Always told you memory was personal, that it lived in your brain, that it died with your body, but that was part of the containment. Because real memory, the kind the Morrison twins carried, is environmental. It lives in places, in wood, in stone, in water, in blood. You walk into a house and feel something's wrong. That's not intuition, that's resonance. You walk by a stranger and feel a chill. That's not coincidence, that's collision. And the world you live in, it's saturated with unprocessed memory. Wars, burials, betrayals, broken covenants. They never left. They're still echoing. You think Pine Hollow was the only place haunted by its own sin? Look around. Cities built on bones. Schools built on shame. Churches erected over massacres. Governments founded on rituals they never ended. And the Morrison twins, they heard the echoes. They became transmitters. And the moment they entered Pine Hollow, the system panicked. Because they didn't ask for permission. They didn't beg for credentials. They simply revealed. And that's the most dangerous act in a controlled world. Revelation. Because revelation shatters programming. It cuts deeper than proof. It speaks not to logic, but to memory that was stolen. And the moment you feel it, you change. You can't unknow. You can't unsee. You either turn back, numb yourself again, or burn your illusions and go to war with the lie. That's the choice in front of you now. Because if the memory lives in the world, and in the bloodline, then it lives in you. You are not just a man. You are an archive, a signal tower, a breaker of patterns passed down for generations. But to wield that power, you must remember what was done. Not just to Pine Hollow, but to all of us. Never publish in textbooks. History isn't written by the victors, it's written by the survivors of memory suppression. The real victors, the architects, they don't write, they erase, they bury, they burn, they rewrite the records until reality itself becomes a hallucination you're forced to share with millions. And by the time you question it, You're already exhausted, medicated, entertained to death. But some men, like you, wake up anyway, and when you do, you start to notice something strange. It's not just the lies they told you, it's the truths they never had to, like why every ancient culture speaks of twins at the edge of their mythology. Egypt, Mesoamerica, Sumer, China, even the Norse. Always twins, linked to knowledge, creation, destruction, balance. Coincidence? Or were the Morrison girls just another manifestation of that original dyad, memory and consequence, appearing again in 1834 because something in the world was out of alignment? You were taught to treat that as myth, but in truth, myth is just the memory that survived the purge, and when the twins began revealing buried truths in Pine Hollow, they weren't anomalies. They were corrections. They were the system rebooting through consciousness, the world trying to remember itself. But memory is rebellion, and rebellion is heresy. So the institution responded the only way it knows how. Erasure. You saw the same pattern in your own life. The moment you questioned authority, you were labeled difficult. The moment you trusted your intuition, you were called irrational. The moment you broke the script, they tried to shame you back into character, but something inside you never fully surrendered. That something is your inheritance, and now it's time to claim it. Because when history wakes up, it doesn't come back gently, it roars through the vessels ready to says, "Oh, hold it." You are one of those vessels, not by chance, not by accident, but because the story never ended. It just waited for you to remember. The veil is natural, that it belongs, that the fog you live in, mentally, spiritually, generationally, is just part of life. It's not. It was engineered, constructed like a prison, but without visible walls, a system so complete that even your doubts feel like yours. Even your fears feel personal. That's the genius of the machine. It didn't just lock you down, it convinced you to lock yourself. Every time you hesitate to speak your truth, that's the program. Every time you ignore that gut feeling, that's the program. Every time you look in the mirror and doubt your own knowing, your own sight, you are witnessing the veil working as designed. The Morrison twins weren't immune to it. They just saw it too early. And they refused to comply. That's what made them dangerous. Not their visions, not their revelations, but their non-participation in the illusion. They refused to act like children. They refused to pretend they didn't see. They refused to forget. And you're starting to do the same. That's why this video isn't going viral like it should. That's why the algorithm chokes it. Because this isn't just content, it's counter-programming, it's friction in the machine, and every second you watch, you're adding to that resistance. Because the more men remember, the harder it becomes for the system to reset. Pine Hollow was supposed to be deleted. A glitch. But that glitch echoed, and now it's infected you. You can feel it, can't you? The subtle shift, the way your breath slows, the way you're not just hearing this, you're absorbing it. You're starting to understand why everything in your life was designed to keep you busy, distracted, small, because you weren't born for survival. You were born for remembrance. And that remembrance, it starts now. You are the breach in the system. You are the anomaly, and they know it. Ancients used long before psychology was invented, before therapy, before neurology, before sedation became salvation. They called it soul fracture. It didn't mean trauma in the way we use the word now. It meant a severing, a violent tearing between who you truly are and who the world needs you to become in order to control you. The Morrison twins? They weren't fractured. That was the threat. They were whole, aligned, unbroken. That's why their presence tore the seams of Pine Hollow's reality apart, because they reminded everyone of what was lost, of the fracture that still bleeds inside you. And if you're honest, you've felt it. The quiet agony of pretending, the smile you wear in rooms that shrink you, The voice you mute when you know damn well something's wrong. It didn't start with you. It started generations ago, when your ancestors were told, obey or starve, forget or die, conform or be cast out. And in that moment, their souls split to survive. They swallowed the lie and passed the fracture down through blood. But now here you are, watching this, hearing truths that trigger something ancient in your gut. That's not emotion, that's integration. That's the parts of you, fractured, scattered, sedated, reconvening. And it hurts. Because remembering always hurts at first. But it's the pain of healing, the ache of bone knitting back together. The Morrison twins didn't just read secrets, they mirrored pain. They reflected the wounds people buried so deeply they forgot they were bleeding. And when a man sees his wound clearly, he has two choices: keep rotting or cut it out. This video, this moment, is the knife. So choose now. Do you want the illusion or the truth that costs everything? Do you want comfort or clarity? Because there's no going back after this. The fracture is visible. The ancient self is waking. And once you remember who you are, the lie can't touch you anymore. Hear this part. This is where they pull the plug, where the signal gets distorted, where the watchers scramble to reinforce the gate. Because Section 23 isn't just revelation, it's reversal. This is where you become the threat. Let me explain. When the Morrison twins vanished, it wasn't just their bodies that disappeared, it was their echo. Their presence was so disruptive that the entire field of collective memory surrounding Pine Hollow had to be collapsed, compressed, sealed. A psychic quarantine. That's why the church was torn down, why records went missing, why no descendant speaks of them now. The memory didn't die, it was buried. And the key to unsealing it is attention. Your attention. That's why you were drawn here, not by curiosity, but by resonance. You've carried the same frequency your whole life. In dreams, in the strange pull to places you've never been, in the shadow that follows you when you're almost asleep, whispering things you pretend not to hear. You're not haunted, you're connected. And when enough men like you focus on the sealed nodes of history, those lost names, buried towns, erased stories, they begin to light up again, like nerve endings in a sleeping giant. That's what the elite ledger is for. Not entertainment, not education, activation. Because when one man remembers, it changes him. But when thousands remember together, it changes reality. That's why I need you now. Stop just watching. Engage. Leave a mark. Comment again. I remember. Not for the algorithm, for the field. You're not feeding a machine, you're charging the breach. Every word is a pulse, every click is a crack. Every name spoken aloud, Rachel, Rebecca, Ezekiel, Pine Hollow, is a trigger that shakes the veil loose. This isn't folklore. This is warfare, and awareness is your weapon. So subscribe to the Elite Ledger, like the video, let them know you see, let them know you've awakened. The story turns violent, not in blood, but in intention. Because once a system realizes it can't seduce you back to sleep, it tries to destroy your clarity. Not all at once, but slowly, subtly. You'll see it now, because you've crossed the line. A spike in distractions, a sudden flood of obligations, anxiety that arrives from nowhere, just as you're about to act. People you trust, turning strange. Old habits returning with renewed strength. That's not coincidence. That's the counter-signal. It's built into this world, just like Pine Hollow. The town itself began to fracture after the twins disappeared. People forgot where they put things. Children developed night terrors. Cattle died without explanation. Husbands stopped recognizing their wives. A fog settled, not on the land, but in the mind, because removing a truth that big leaves a vacuum. And what do institutions do with a vacuum? They fill it, with ritual, with stories, with rules that punish curiosity. A new pastor was installed, one who preached fire and silence. Children were warned, never speak of the Morrison girls again, never talk about what happened in the church, never ask why their names were scrubbed from the ledgers. But memory doesn't die, it mutates. In the years that followed, the town's children began to draw twins with black eyes. They didn't know why, they just did. One child whispered to his mother that the floorboards still spoke at night. Another claimed a girl with golden hair stood outside his window every November. You see, when a revelation is suppressed, it doesn't vanish. It becomes a haunting. That's what the world has become. Not a home, but a haunted house of buried awakenings. And now you're walking its halls with your eyes wide open. You're not afraid, because fear is for those who don't understand the game, but you do now. This is no longer about the Morrison twins. This is about what they represented. Memory that refused to stay buried. Truth that refused to be silenced. A man, you, who refuses to go back. The final descent is here. And once you pass through, there's no returning. Everything that came before, your routines, your beliefs, your comfort, burns here. Because here's the truth you were never meant to hear. The system was never afraid of the Morrison twins, not really. It was afraid of what they would awaken in men like you who were never meant to be passive, you whose eyes were always just a little too sharp, you whose questions never quite died, no matter how often you were told to shut up, sit still, behave. It wasn't the twins' knowledge that threatened Pine Hollow, it was their ability to infect others with remembrance. That's what you've caught now. Not a curse. A contagion of clarity. And clarity is lethal to control. Because a man who remembers what he is cannot be owned. A man who sees the architecture of illusion cannot be governed by it. You are not just an individual, you are an initiated, and they've spent generations trying to make sure men like you never meet. Because when awakened men gather, systems fall. When they speak, illusions shatter. When they act, the world rewrites itself. So now, I leave you with a decision. You can go back, pretend this was just a dark tale, swipe to the next video, scroll until the weight of this revelation fades. Or, you can stay, subscribe to the Elite Ledger and claim your place among the remembering. Comment once more, louder than before. I remember, I do not consent. Because this isn't just about memory anymore, it's about sovereignty. And in a world built to bury the divine masculine under guilt, sedation, and mockery, your clarity is an act of warfare. So walk tall now. You are no longer part of the audience. You are the echo of what they tried to silence. The fire that slips through cracks they thought were sealed. The myth that refused to stay dead. This is the end of their lie, and the beginning of your legend. You are the ledger, and they will never sleep easy again.